Good evening and welcome to a new edition of To The Point. This evening we'll be addressing the mini summit on Libya that is being held in Italy, the significance of the President Abdel-Fattah al-Sisi's attending this summit in person, and what are we hoping to achieve from that summit. With us this evening to discuss this issue is Her Excellency Ambassador Wafa Basim, who is the former Assistant Foreign Minister. Pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you.
With us also this evening is Dr. محمد Abdalhalim, Professor of Political Science. Pleasure to have you with us. And maybe I'll start with Your Excellency, the political significance of Egypt's president attending this summit in person, and how does this reflect on maybe bilateral relations between Egypt and Italy? Before we go into the actual cause of the summit, the Libyan file, which is quite another issue that we will be tackling, but the significance of him attending in person.
Well, by attending this, whether you call it mini summit, limited summit, or whatever, it is an international summit, of course, because if we go through the list of participants, countries-wise, we will find that there is Egypt, that there is the Russian Federation, Tunisia, Libya, of course, with its two factions, yes, Sarraj and Haftar, the European Union, the Council of Europe, France, Italy, who is the host country, Chad, neighboring country, Algeria, Tunisia, of course. The significance of the attendance of His Excellency President Sisi is that he is sending, or this presence is sending, three messages, to say the least. First message is that we believe in the unity of Libya and the Libyan people. We believe in the political solution that should not leave anybody out, that Egypt is on an equal distance of everybody, and that Egypt is backing and supporting any effort internationally or regionally that would lead to bringing back peace and unity to Libya. The second message is that, as the President said in his statement at the opening of the summit, is that Libya is an issue not only of neighboring country or economic stability or long-lived links, social, human, historical, but that Libya is an issue of national security for Egypt. And from that point, and since he's the first responsible by constitution, by the fact that he is the president of Egypt, he's the first responsible for the security and the national security of this country. And I'm here to say that this issue is important for Egypt, and Egypt will never be left out of any effort or any gathering that is tackling this question. The third message is, of course, that in the light of the excellent relations that are existing between Egypt and Italy, we are there to support you, to support your efforts, and to express our solidarity with all the efforts you are doing as a Mediterranean country, as a long historical partner, and even with the view of the links that link you that you do have with Libya, whether before colonialism or post-colonialism era. So that is what I would say about the significance of the presence of His Excellency President El-Sisi in Palermo last night and today.
Significance of the presence, him being present in person, and how does this work in favor of bilateral relations with Italy?
Well, continuing the three messages that Her Own Excellency actually did talk about right from the early start, we can really also add one significant and straightforward message on the part of the political authority, that is His Own Excellency, Mr. Abdel Sisi, his own existence in person or personally, and his own insistence of being in there, instead of sending someone else actually to speak in lieu of his own, excellency, I would say, is this degree of seriousness of the position of the military situation actually, and of the threatening dangers that are besieging the Libyan territories, particularly once we get to know that between Libya and Egypt, as Her Own Excellency did say, that very thin line and very thin borderline actually. One of the most interesting facts that we would have to be quite aware is the sort of the 1,200 kilometers actually, the adjacent borderlines that you are sharing with the Libyan territories. That would maximize the sort of the tribute and the price that is to be paid at the end of the day. I would say, in other terms, or simplifying what I have said, that our own Egyptian armed forces are paying high taxes and high, tributes actually in defending not only our own border lines, but the strategic and the very much, you understand, serious threatening dangers that would come from the ISIS and the Daesh groups from the western borderlines of Libya. So we would have to be very much careful of our own borderlines, in much the same way that we would have to pay tribute also for the Libyan side. One of the most important issues that Mr. Abdel Sisi's Own Excellency is quite, aware of endorsing and of, propagating throughout this mini summit is the sort of the role that is to be played in His Own Excellency in bringing together the factions and the two desperate poles actually. Every now and again, since quite a long period of time, perhaps 2 or 3 years, that diplomatic ties and very much strong attempts are being paid on the part of the presidential authority and diplomatic circles actually to bring both Khalifa Al-Qasem Haftar and Faiz Sarraj together, despite the fact that every now and again that there are a large number of conspiracies on both local as much as international arenas that are to be directed and dedicated so as not actually to be let them at the end of the day as one unified force. And one of the reasons that he's in there personally, side by side with the Tunisian president, because a large number of the attendants are mostly either foreign minister, prime minister, and I think his own insistence of being in there is just a straightforward and very much direct message for the world at large and the international community, particularly once we get to know that the American side is absent and missing from the political scene actually, that there may be hidden agendas actually that are to be dedicated and very much directed and channeled towards the failure and absolute fiasco of that sort of mini summit, I would say. But his honestness of being there is another sort of straightforward message that we are always there. We will try to harp on bringing together the two factions, the two desperate poles actually, together for the interests of all concerned, in the interests of the Libyan people as much as the Egyptian people or citizens as well, because I've just said at the very beginning that very thin borderline that would separate our own borderlines from theirs. And in this way, we would have to be very much careful of His Own Excellency's deep interest actually of unifying and solidifying the case of the Libyan armed forces and try to negotiate with Khalifa Al-Qasem Haftar, no matter he may be actually for the present time situation, just by way of, unifying our own borderlines in much the same way that we get into the heart of the strategic district that is the Libyan territories outside.
The absence of, the US absence, so to speak, can we read this as them not in agreement to the reunification formula? Or is this a signal that further US withdrawal from this region, if we can put it that way?
Well, the US would never withdraw from this region, but it's the form of intervening, at what level, what is the timing. Since the Libyan crisis started, if you notice very well, the US has not been heavily present on the ground. It has always kept itself sort of apart or aloof or watching from a distance. It never wanted to be part of the NATO bombing of Libya when it happened. It never wanted to align itself with the European position in general. But it has an eye, of course, on the Libyan Isle. It has an eye on the security in the Mediterranean for its own security purpose and interests, and it has an eye to the post-conflict resolution. What will be its share in deciding the future of Libya after a roadmap is being set? The assistant to the special envoy, UN envoy to Libya, is an American politician, and that means that her presence in this post is quite significant. On the other hand, the US is following closely what's happening even if it did not participate. They have different views than the Italian point of view as far as the future of Libya is concerned. They have another different view as far as the European Union is concerned, and they don't agree with all the points of the roadmap that was set by the United Nations a few months ago, and that which has provided for a plan to hold elections next 10th December. Unfortunately, this plan has been shelved since there is no law on elections that had been promulgated by the House of, by the Parliament, by the Libyan Parliament, and that the security situation at large does not allow yet for these elections. So it's the, how do you say, the absent present player, but definitely they are watching very closely. We will see the same cautiousness, but not highly expressed as the Americans in the position of Russia. Despite that President Putin was in Paris yesterday for the, or the day before, for the memory of the First World War, everybody thought that he would come to Palermo to participate, but actually no, it's his prime minister who came from Russia to participate in this meeting. So it's a sort of cautiousness with which the two major players are attending to the Libyan questions. It's a sort of wait and see. And maybe because they didn't expect that a strong, definite declaration or end of this conference with clear lines on what's next, they didn't want to get involved yet. They want to give time for the negotiations, to give a significance that we're not very happy with what is happening, and we are watching closely, but we're not yet ready to participate there.
Can we have a solution to the Libyan conflict, a political solution to the Libyan conflict outside this region?
Well, I wouldn't say so. Actually, I mean, the decision taken, as much as that decision making actually should be solidified and should be taken actually from within, not from without. That is to say, throughout a long period of time in our own negotiations with Hamas and Fatah, actually, His Own Excellency was...
I didn't want to refer that to that example.
I mean, it's just a link of the chain, I would say. It
doesn't augur very well, so I didn't want to refer
well, I would say that it's a diplomatic formula. The fact that all the problematic issues and the sort of the dilemmas, actually, particularly on political arena, I would say, should be solved and sorted out from within, not from without. When just a link, it's just a little simplification, as much as very much a slight exemplification to refer to Fatah and Hamas, actually. When they are, since quite a long period of time, more than 15 years, that they are tussling and, rejecting and denying and reacting to each other, actually, each in his own way, I would say. The Egyptian diplomacy is very much keeping an eye of bringing them together before, representing the sort of reaction against Donald Trump's, for example, publication of Jerusalem as an eternal capital of Israel and moving his own embassy to be part and parcel of the Israeli and the Jewish land and there. Our own invitation, actually, as politicians, actually, to both Fatah and Hamas is to sit and bring together all their own, disagreements and all their own...
Can this happen on the Libyan side?
Yeah, I'm just saying that by way of, simplifying the issue. I would really say, and insist in saying that all the problematic issues should be solidified and should be solved from within. That is to say, in other terms, Mr. Al-Tahsisi's own excellency is trying to represent three major issues, actually, and bringing that sort of tussle to 0 point. The first is the military interference. We have nothing to do with interfering on a military point of view. All what we would do, actually, as Egyptian armed forces, try to fortify, the Libyan armed forces. Particularly when they are denied, actually, any sort of access of weaponries and modern technological aspects. All what we can really find is just some militias tussling with each other, fighting groups, each of which would try to stabilize its own existence in there, and this is very dangerous for our own borderlines, as I just said at the very beginning. The second interference should be very much diplomatic, which has almost everything to do with your own point of question, which is, it's an invitation on His Own Excellency's part, actually, for both Khalifa Qasim Haftar as much as Faiz Sarraj to sit and arrange and pacify all their own disagreements, actually, and make a sort of a democratic election at the end of the day, by insisting every now and again on representing that the right part that would have to have its own say about the whole thing is the Libyan citizens, actually, the Libyan figures that are eligible, actually, in saying yes or no, of selecting this or that. And the third interference should be very much economic, that is directing and channeling, actually, all this waste of energetic, oil wells towards the interests, actually, of the Libyan citizens. And I think that the American administration is keeping an eye, as Her Own Excellency would say, a couple of minutes ago, that keeping an eye on the sort of the fortunes of the Libyan territories by concentrating much too much on what you might say the fourth generation of war, actually, to try to initiate tussles and sorts of...
I think we've reached the fifth generation.
Yeah, to a greater extent. But on a distance, actually, it is to be initiated on a distance. That's why I think that the solving of the whole problematic issue would come by two major interferences. The first, the UN envoy, that should be there, actually, for solving that problematic issue in the interests of all concerned, I mean, the Libyan figures, and much the same way that there should be what you might call a certain message that should be directed, actually, to the world community at large, which is it's their own right, actually, to say yes or no for this and that, and to be very much deciding their own interests in life as Libyan citizens, as indigenous citizens, I would say.
Your Excellency, do you see a political solution to the conflict? Or have we surpassed the stage whereby we can reunite the Libyan rank and file?
No, in the contrary. I see a political solution, but it's what you would say, it's very much at the end of the tunnel. It's a difficult one. It's a bumpy road. It needs political will from the Libyan, from within, and a political will on the side of the international community. Because there is always, I wouldn't go that far to say the hidden agendas, but you always have to ask the question, who has interest in continuing the state of chaos in Libya, the state of disintegration in this country? Who is trying to acerbate, as they say, the differences between the different factions in Libya? Libya was united because of historical factors. The minute this factor and the disappearance of the former regime, everybody, it disintegrated. You have the different factions, the different sectarian religious parties, and this is what is very, very difficult to deal with. On the other hand, there is a feeling of injustice among the Libyan people. They know they are a rich country, they have tremendous resources from the oil, but they don't feel anything on the ground. All that was going before to an unfair distribution of income now is going to this sectarian war, that is taking place there. So, and as Dr. Muhammad said a minute ago, President el-Sisi is very keen on saying we are at equal distance from every Libyan. They are all dear to us, they are all important. No solution without the participation of each and every Libyan. That's why the solution will never come from outside unless inside, internally, people want it, work for it, and trying hard. President Sisi held two summits, summit talks with Mr. Haftar and with Mr. Al-Sarraj yesterday in Palermo, to talk to both of them, to try to bring them to the negotiating table. Egypt has held 6 meetings for the Libyan personalities and leaders to try to bring them together. It has been the shepherd, I would say, to Al-Sukhayrat agreement, for instance, concerning Libya. It is trying to rebuild the Libyan institutions, whether the parliament, of course, the armed forces, and the anti-terrorism forces, because as we all agree here, that terrorism is not a threat only to Libya and to the Libyan people, it's a threat to all the neighbors, and particularly to Egypt due to the very long frontiers that we have with them. It's very important also not to overlook the role of the neighboring countries. And Egypt is always keen to bring together the neighboring countries of Libya to work together, each doing his own efforts or pressuring and influencing the groups that he can influence, so all of them would come together at a certain point to negotiate and to reach an agreement on how to do the elections first and when. Now we're talking, instead of December, we are talking about sometime between March and May. That's very important. We are talking about the importance before the elections to have a national conference of the Libyans themselves, which we all hope, according to the roadmap, would take place early in 2019, and it should be in Libya, again, from within, because you can't make a national conference talking about Libya outside Libya. It can't work this way. So this is what we are hoping very much, and Egypt, I'm sure, has committed itself for its own benefit, but also for the benefit of peace and security in the region, to continue working with all parties, Libyan and non-Libyans, who are concerned about what is happening, who want to reach a peaceful agreement, a global one, for all sectors, but also for all parties. It would include political, economic, social, political participation, parliamentarian, and so on and so forth. And we are very much alerting everybody of those who are trying to be troublemakers, who are trying to spoil any effort to reach an agreement for the Libyan conflict.
If the war is not in your backyard, maybe you would turn a blind eye to it and maybe watch the whole thing burn until it falls into ashes. Some critics are quite pessimistic because in critical issues or in boiling points in this region, the situation on the Palestinian territories, the situation in Iraq, the situation in Syria, whenever there is any tangible progress, if we can say tangible progress that is being made, something has to happen to deter the issue from being resolved. And can we apply the same scenario to the situation in Libya, especially when we look at, with all due respect, a country like the United States, which is the superpower of the world, the fact that it was not present in such a meeting, other countries not being represented at a high level, so to speak, and other countries that sort of walked away because they didn't get a chance to meddle the way they want to meddle, like Turkey, for example. Is this fertile ground for any progress for a peaceful, lasting political solution, or are we going to run into jumbles the way we're running into them or ran into them in Iraq, Syria, and the Palestinian
Yemen and that sort of thing. Yeah,
I mean, all over Sudan. Yeah. I mean, we have these boiling points everywhere.
Absolutely, yeah, you're absolutely right. The fact that, well, I mean, in terms of representing two major items, that is either pessimism or optimism, actually. Well, I think that this couldn't be applied, actually, within, you know, the world of politics, actually. It's not a matter of being very much optimistic as to what sort of fruits I would get, or being very much pessimistic for the final results that may be there.
Let's talk about pragmatic.
Well, absolutely right, yeah. It's a sort of very much pragmatic solutions, mutual identifications, give and take dialogue in the interests of all concerned. I would really say that Russia would interfere every now and again in Libya for some reasons, and much the same way that Italy wouldn't forget that Libya at one stage was an Italian colony, actually. So it would have its own way with it. And much the same way that the other countries also have got political agendas, actually. The exposure of Libya, actually, within that sort of very much strategic geographical territory, exposing very great and expanded borderlines to the Mediterranean Sea. You know, I mean, has almost everything to do with what you might call the illegal immigrations, despite the fact that, I mean, you know, I mean, yesterday there is a propagation that the number of illegal immigrants would seem to be quite very much minimized to a greater extent. But still, the case is still a bit worse, actually, for those European countries, particularly during the course of the last previous 2 years. They are claiming much too much, actually, of paying, you know, great deal of tributes towards accommodating as much as safeguarding all these, you know. So
they will help in solving the issue to prevent illegal immigration?
This is one thing. And for another, actually, I would insist on the mutual identification between, you know, I mean, the parties that are, would have each of which would have its own way and its own materialistic and tangible ends, actually, of the whole situation. But you have said something significant at the very beginning, which is, you know, at each single individual moment that you feel that there is a consummation of success in any conceivable respect between all concerned, I would say, you feel that there is something that would interfere in the interests of turning the whole scenario into an absolute sense of fiasco or failure. This is absolutely right. We wouldn't have to forget the previous tragic and instantaneous deaths of Giulio Regeni, actually, the Italian student that had been assassinated for no reasons, actually, until today, even after the lapse of more than 1.5 years. The reasons of detecting the, you know, I mean, the schematic agenda and the secrets behind his own assassination, it didn't seem to be quite detected yet. And I think this is one of the highest levels, because at one time, before the actual assassination of Giulio Regeni, the sort of the diplomatic and consulatic relations and the mutual identification between Egypt on one hand, as much as Italy, would reach to a great deal of success. Then all of a sudden, actually, you'd find the sort of the sudden devastation of an Italian student for no reasons, actually. and the sort of the consummation of the crime. Despite the fact that there is, in criminology and penology, a little say that would say we wouldn't have that sort of complete crime, but the fact remains that they are detecting, surveying, selecting, and rejecting until today the reasons behind which that little student was assassinated. And it would have, actually, outside, it's very much devastating impact on the then relations, had it not been for the interference of His Own Excellency yesterday and a couple of days to try to bring the mutual identifications and the interests of both countries together. This is part of his own schematic, actually, agenda towards solving the sort of the turmoil, actually, that had been initiated and the sort of the disparity that had been inaugurated to a greater extent. To my own view, actually, I would really believe that that sort of visit, despite the fact that it's a bit early, actually, to try to detect and to, represent the final results of it, actually. To what extent, actually, whether or not it is going to be very much solidified on the ground, actually. I would really say in the interests of our own community as much as the Libyan side, and solving the problematic situation and the sort of the turmoil that is to be initiated for quite a long period of time in Libya. We have had a very much negative step that would, at the end of the day, bring together, I think, by the sort of bringing together both Khalifa Qasim Haftar and Faiz al-Sarraj on deciding one unifying democratic sort of selection for the sort of man that would rule the Libyan citizens, I would say.
Your Excellency, the summit is still continuing, so to speak. What are we expecting within the next few hours or days to be achieved? I believe it's a 2 or 3 day summit. What will be achieved in terms of pushing forth a political solution? What are we aspiring to see?
Well, the summit should end, I think, tomorrow evening, should wrap up. The mini summit of the most important countries has taken place already. What will be happening now is deep discussion that should go into details that would lead to a sort of scenario of what will happen next. This is at least what we hope. We have already, it's not that we don't have, we have already a roadmap by the United Nations. And the UN envoy, special envoy, Mr. Hassan Salama, is on the ground. And he was participating in the mini summit that took place today, and of course in the preliminary working dinner that took place yesterday. Now, things for him are very clear. What he needs now is that what should come out of this conference in Palermo is a renewal of the belief of the neighboring countries first and the international community second in the importance of a global solution, inclusive, that would take everybody on board, and that would take before anything the interests of the Libyan people and their safety and their welfare on board on different levels.
Yes.
Because you have so many details: the territorial integrity, the army, the anti-terrorism campaign, the parliament, the wide representation of the different factions in Libya, the protection of the borders, the relation with Libya of tomorrow with its regional realm, as they say, the regional space, and the international community. There must be a renewal in the confidence that the solution should stem from the Libyans themselves, and they should be the major player in deciding their fate and to determine their
Do you sense
future.
that there is a political will by both parties to do this?
I think so, but at the same time there is the problem of who would have the upper hand.
Isn't that what happened in Palestine?
This is
the concern.
I mean, this is what is happening. You see, the problem is in Palestine. We forgot because of who should have the upper hand. Now we are looking at what we would call the difference Palestine, and we forgot the major problem,
which is the occupation.
We tend to put it in another order of priority, which does not exist now.
Even the occupying forces capitalizing on the divide in rank and file.
Very much so.
Yes.
And we forgot the main issue, which is the long-lasting peace and just peace for Palestine, on the base of the two states, with East Jerusalem as a capital of Palestine, and based on the international resolution and international principle, just principle of international law.
Is there a fear that we would fall into the same trap, so to speak, in the Libyan question?
If everybody is not careful, if you are not able to be pragmatic, I mean the Libyans, and if they are not able to be pragmatic enough, to be smart enough, and to understand that you cannot take it all or leave it all, you must reach a win-win situation where the welfare of the Libyan people is the most important. So the political will is important, and the participation and the awareness of the Libyan people for their own benefit is very important. They should not be attracted or protracted into those many internal conflicts that are wasting their time, their forces, their energies, their lives, and all their resources. Now all the resources are for arms for the different factions.
Rather than building the country.
Rather than building the country and building its institutions. On the other hand, the international community has to be sincere and not only paying what we call lip service. Because sometimes you feel that certain forces, for the benefit of who would be the prima donna on the scene, who will be the godfather of the solution, they forget that they have to work for that and to work together on that. So that's very, very important, and of course we hope that the solution will not take years and then decades
or it will vanish
until we reach it, really.
Whenever we talk about the Libyan conflict and conferences and summits, one thing that I've noticed has not been raised in our discussion tonight is the role of the Arab League, or the League of Arab States, that is the umbrella under which we all fall. Some people say, well, any weakness in that institution is a reflection, it's because it's a mirror reflecting our political will within this region. But shouldn't charity start at home? I mean, shouldn't a solution, or wouldn't a stronger interference by the Arab League represented in the different Arab countries bring maybe a faster, more safe and conducive political solution to the crises in Libya, rather than maybe some say that when you sort of stretch the discussion to outside parties, some might not have the vested interest in seeing the Libyan people or the Libyan rank and file united, because Libya is a rich country, it's a powerful country, and maybe some would not want it to regain that power again.
Out of the Arab countries, actually, under the title of the Arab League, you might have said. Some Arab countries, actually.
I'm not saying some Arab countries. Yeah. I'm saying that shouldn't
partners, actually, of the Arab League.
Shouldn't we, as Arabs, find a solution to the Libyan crisis? And when I say we, I don't mean Egypt, because it cannot be just Egypt. Libya is not just in our backyard. I mean, we do have a long stretch of borders, but we are all part and parcel of this region, and a country falling in this region affects the rest of us. So I'm saying we as in Arabs under the umbrella of the Arab League.
Well, we wouldn't have to forget that Eden, Prime Minister of Britain at one time, did say that we do really know that the Arabs are very much unified on one essential and final target at the end of the day, which is that they wouldn't have to be unified, actually. We'd have to consider that sort of thing. In our own political discussion of the sort of the future that would be waiting, the sort of solving that sort of problem. But we cannot deprive the Arab League from its own real words, actually, of interfering every now and again, more than 40 years ago, trying to, assist and solidify some countries in their own revolutions against the colonialism. But the major, and the final overall estimation, actually, of the sort of the role that should be directed at the Arab League would seem to be quite a bit weak, had it not been for the fact that it seems to be quite absent rather than being present, I would say.
Your Excellency, you have 1 minute. The Arab League role in this conflict.
I think it's present. The item is always present on the agenda of the Arab League. Meetings are going and coming. I'm not really sure if the Arab League has been invited to that mini summit in Palermo. I haven't seen anything.
Which is a catastrophe if it's not.
I haven't seen anything indicating that they were invited or they were not. I'm not sure about that. I hope they have been invited because, as you say, it's also very strange that we invite the European Union, that the Council of Europe is present, and the Arab League should be.
The UN is present and the Arab League.
Well, the UN, I mean.
But the Arab League is right there.
Always marginalized, actually, to a greater extent.
Well, the problem also is, again, in the way that decisions are taken within the Arab League, the possibility of enforcing resolutions,
yes.
Of making the others also ready to listen to what the Arab League does. I mean, we don't want to enter into the importance or the need to adapt and to reform the Arab League so it can have a stronger role in the issues and crises that are related to peace and security of the Arab countries and of its member states. So that's a long and difficult and sad file, unfortunately, and more what we call the common Arab efforts and work is sort of dissolving, despite all the goodwill of the Secretary Generals, of the Secretariat,
and some member countries,
and of many of the member states. But the fact that you cannot enforce a solution, which is, by the way, the same problem
with the UN, even.
The UN.
Yes, definitely.
How can you impose a solution unless you are under Chapter 7 of the Constitution? Of the Charter, I would say.
Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately our time is up. I'd like to thank you both for your fruitful input. I'd like to thank you, the viewers. We'll see you same time next week. Until then, good night.